Hello people! In this video there's some tips on how to use a router to avoid chip out, thinking about direction and wood grain, both on a handheld and a table router. And by the way, I'm using bits from Radian. Dan from Radian kindly supported a recent episode of Luthier's Lunch Break, and this is a slightly extended version of the segment that appeared in that. Links in the video description for Radian and for Luthier's Lunch Break. So when you have your router pointing upwards, because it's fixed in a table like this one, you want to make sure that you hold your guitar body or whatever it is you're routing between you and the router bit. And then you feed your wood from the right to the left. Very straightforward. Make sure you always keep the wood between you and the router bit. So don't go all the way round the router bit, that would be very dangerous. Instead, you can rotate your wood round as you're working. Now there is one thing to think about, which is chip out because of the grain direction of your wood. But it's something I always have in the back of my mind when I'm planning how to move my wood in relation to the router bit. But just quickly to say, if you're using a handheld router, a palm router or a plunge router, you want to hold the router between you and the wood to start with. And you move, instead of from right to left with the wood, you move the router from left to right. That means as you're going around your wood, you're going to be going around it anti-clockwise. Of course, if you're reaching over the body, you want to be super careful that you're not overextending your arms too much, and therefore you might not have control holding the router. So some people may want to move around the body themselves. But if you're working in a cavity, then you're going the other way. If you're working in a cavity, you're moving from right to left or going clockwise around the edge of the cavity. So that would be like if you're using a template to route a pickup cavity. Now let's just have a quick look at this bit of wood. You can see the direction of the grain and you can see the curve of the body. So now if the router enters at this point, it's potentially going against the grain. So how do we resolve that? Well, when I'm doing on my router table, what I like to do, as I said, from right to left, until I get to a point where I think the router is going to be approaching the grain, the end of the grain. Then I'll skip that bit and carry on working round. And one of the great things about this router bit is it has a bearing at the top and the bottom, which means I can simply flip my guitar body and template over, and now I can still route in the same direction, right to left. But instead of going into the grain, I can go over the grain and pass over without risking any chip out. You could essentially do the same if it was handheld as well, just flipping the body with the template on. And this bit's specifically designed for guitar bodies. Look, it's just the right width for it, perfect. And one thing Dan said he notices quite a lot is people don't have good enough support for their router, which means the router could tip like this as it's going around, particularly risky when you're going towards a neck pocket of a guitar. But one way around that is to make your own router bases or buy new ones. Dan said he 3D prints them. I make them like this out of acrylic. I just simply get a bit of acrylic. You don't want it to be too flexible, so I prefer 5 or 6 millimeters. Make a hole in the middle that's big enough for the router bits to go through. Basically, I use the same as the base of my router bit. I use the base of the router bit also to mark out where the holes go, which I then countersunk, and then I can screw it back onto the base of my router and I've got a new router plate. I have them in different sizes. I made different ones depending on what I'm working on. As you can see here, it really stops that wobbling. And here's a quick little tip. I've got a block of wood, I've cut this sort of shape into it, and it makes a really simple, easy to use stand for my router so that I don't have to put the bit back in every time or lie the router dangerously on its side.